Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. So this will be the most important chapter in the book. This is a review of the third chapter. This chapter is all about progress, regress, and winning and losing when it comes to our, battle with time, battle versus our previous selves, I guess you could say, but more, about progress and regress. So the ideas of progress and regress when it comes to a society-wide scale are always false if they are not considered with their opposition. So if progress is considered without regress, then that idea is false, and if regress is considered without progress, then that idea is also false. There will always be progress and regress at whatever macro scale or society-wide scale venture which we put ourselves through. There will always be progress, there will always be regress. That's just how it works effectively. Where there is progress, there will be regress. Where there is regress, there will be progress. There cannot be one without the other. So throughout the chapter, I give multiple examples of regressive parts of society, which are commonly seen as being purely progressive. The first example which I give here is the aging population, or increased life expectancy brought about by medical advancements and different, mainly just medical advancements. I guess you could say like societal advancements as well, but mainly medical ones. So obviously medical progress, as I said it there, is commonly seen as progress, medical advancements, advancing towards something, but we'll get onto the idea of advancements a bit later. So I gave the example of Japan here, where they have the longest life expectancy of any country in the world at the time of recording this. However, this brings along with it a lot of negative impacts and a lot of negative consequences on the Japanese population, especially the younger population. So this has a manifold effect. So the first effect is because the older people mainly take from the economy instead of giving into the economy, because obviously they're beyond the working age now, they're older than the working age, so they're taking out of the economy, taking out from their pension and so on. This means that the younger generation of Japan are going to have to work harder in order to keep up their in order to deal with the economic load given to them by the older generation of Japanese people. These people working harder leads to many different negative impacts, one of them being kudoshi, I believe it's how it's pronounced, which is people dying from being overworked. This has been a generally increasing phenomenon in Japan, where people are dying because they're getting overworked. They're working too much because they have to provide more than they had to provide before, because they have more people to provide for the below working age people and the above working age people in Japan. Because of this, more people are dying at work, less people are taking time off at work even when given the option to, because it's ingrained into the culture, the salaryman culture, that you have to work extremely hard and give it all you've got effectively. Even when you're outside of work, you're still sort of confined to do sort of pseudo obligatory work related activities, like going out with work colleagues, which you kind of are obligated to do because it keeps you in this work culture. However, on the other side of this highly demanding, highly extreme work culture leads to an excess of people on both negative ends of the spectrum, on both extremes. The kudokoshi people, who are working too hard and dying because of that, and hikikomoris, who are people who are not working, who are working significantly less, and because they're working significantly less because they don't want to deal with the stress which is demanded of them in large part by this salaryman culture. So they're not in work at all, and they're often leading very reclusive lives, not really interacting with the outside world and all of this stuff, right? Which can be seen as a negative impact of the increased birth rates. The increased life expectancy. However, now we get on to birth rates. So because people are working more, and because of the hikikomori situation, where people are going out and meeting each other less, they're becoming more reclusive because they are stricken and damaged by this highly demanding culture. Because they're working more and and more hikikomoris are around, it's leading to less people having children, and the Japanese birth rate is slowly falling as time goes on. One of the reasons why this is such a negative thing is because it perpetuates the cycle even more, right? Since less young people are being born, the proportion of young to old people is only going to increase in favor of the old people, which means as time goes on, as there's more old people in the Japanese society, the younger people are going to have to work even more, pressing down even more, making even more kadoshi events, making even more hikikomoris in the process, and it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it will continue to expand and repeat itself throughout time, right? However, again, this is not negative. This is not necessarily fully regressive. If this wasn't to be the case, if life expectancy wasn't to be increasing, then there'll just be another issue which would come about, right? My point here is not that progress is regress, but that there is always progress in regress and always regress in progress. There's always both of them. I'm not making any prescriptive claims here. I'm just saying that whenever you try to move forward on a macro society-wide scale, there will also be movement backwards. That's just how it works. So that's the first example I gave. The second example I gave was with the medical field, and the first example in that example was the treatment of flu. So generally we treatment of fever, not treatment of flu. So the treatment of fever in society is seen as mainly a negative thing. We try and treat it, we try and get rid of it. However, fever helps us deal with a lot of the illnesses which we have throughout our lives. It can be seen as a positive thing rather than a negative thing. And if we try and deal with fever, it can lead to us perpetuating the illness or the disease into society and onto ourselves for a longer period of time than would be optimal or than would be seen as preferable. So the second example in that example which I gave is the example of medical screenings, and how medical screenings only serve to improve medical anxiety and health anxiety rather than actually help with screenings. So screenings have not been shown to increase mortality rate. Generally, they're just seen to cause much negative, right? Although obviously screenings have advantages, and that's the whole point I'm making throughout this chapter. As I've said before, there are advantages, there are disadvantages, there are always regression and progression. There are always both. You can't have one without the other. So then I'll go on to the last point here, which I make. I think it's the second to last point I'm making in the regression subchapter. So the idea of science as a whole was presented by Nietzsche in his book The Gay Science, and it's not about what he thinks about. I'm going to read out a chapter from this or a little passage from his book here. So in this chapter he writes, "A scientific interpretation of the world as you understand it might therefore still be one of the most stupid of all possible interpretations of the world, meaning that it would be one of the poorest in meaning. Assuming that one might estimate the value of a piece of music according to how much of it could be counted, calculated, and expressed in formulas, how absurd would such a scientific estimation of music be? Would one have comprehended, understood, and grasped of it? Nothing really, nothing of what music truly is." So there we go. From that we can say that as the scientific interpretation of the world increases, there is a lack of meaning, there is an increase in nihilism, which is what Nietzsche predicted and is what's happening here. So science is in a way a caveat for nihilism, and in that we see the progress in the regress on a very, very large scale idea as science, right? Huge idea. I then go on to talk about how commonly seen regress has within it some progress. So the first example I give is of global warming. So global warming has along with it global greening because of the CO2 emissions, more specifically CO2 emissions in the global warming phenomena. So CO2 obviously is what plants use as fuel in some respects, and because of this there is more global greening. The earth has gotten more green, and there have been studies done on this because of the increased CO2 levels. So then I make a point that progress and regress in truth are actually impossible for four main reasons. So the first reason is because of how we can't actually establish good and bad in and of themselves. So let's say, how would we establish good and bad? Would it be like, if it's good for 100 people and bad for 50 people, then it's good? And then how are we establishing the good or bad? Let's say like one person feels like 5 times the amount of positive emotion than the other person feels negative emotion. Then is this action good? It's very difficult to interact and work with these sorts of ideas because we don't have a well-established idea of what good actually means, or how to quantify positive emotion in people. It's very difficult to do that, and it's extremely difficult to quantify it, and then to compare it against another person's positive emotion, and then to come forward with a conclusion about what to do, right? But that's only one reason. The second reason is the different styles of moral systems, deontology, consequentialism, egoism, altruism, all of these different ideas. Which one would we say is the correct thing? We're going to use utilitarianism, and we're going to use deontological ideas. There's different moral systems which we could use. The next idea being temporality, the idea that an event might seem to be negative on its face, but then it might prevent another negative event from happening, right? It might prevent, like, you might miss the bus. However, if you got on that bus, the bus might get in an accident and you would be severely injured for the rest of your life. A bad event turns out to be a good event because it stops you from having an even worse event later down the line. So would that be seen as a good event? Would that be seen as a bad event? This is where it gets very complex. And then the last idea when it comes to actual progress and regress is the idea of a goal, right? So how can you say that you can progress if you don't have a goal? How can one progress if they don't have a goal? And my argument here is that in truth, we do not have a goal. We don't have an end. We don't have a terminus. And the main reason why we don't have a terminus is because of three main reasons, three main things which we need in order to have a terminus. So these main prerequisites are desire, reference, and terminus. So reference means that we have to have an example of someone else doing it. Let's say, like, you want to be a pianist, you have to realize that being a pianist is an actual thing which you can do. If you don't know that piano exists, then you're never going to want to become a pianist, right? You're never going to have the reference in order to do it. The second is desire. You have to have an innate desire to become X thing. And the last one is terminus. You have to have an end goal of what you're going to become. You have to have an end idea of what you're going to do. However, with this, society as a whole has none of these. We don't have reference of what we want to be like. We don't have desire because we are an amalgamation, an amorphous amalgamation of clambering wills, I guess you might say. So we can't have one concise desire, and we can't have a terminus either because all of our actions presume humanity to go on into perpetuity. There is no end result, there's no end aim which we have, and because of this there can be no progress or regress. In truth, there is only spinning, and that's why that subchapter is called Spin. So yeah, that's a quick analysis of the third chapter there. I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, I'll get back to you with the fourth chapter review a bit later. Thank you a lot for watching. I'll see you later.